Hello again, Chris Lee and Chase Robinson of Southeastern 14 here to preview South Carolina's football schedule for the 2024 season. We're previewing every single SEC team's schedule and a lot more for this coming football season. Before Chase Robinson joins me to present that schedule, reminder, our content brought to you by BetOnline, your number one source for all your summer sports this season, from MLB, golf, the NBA, and NHL playoffs. All the latest stats, news, and scores available to follow your favorite teams. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on all the action. Bet online where the game starts. Will be an interesting season for the Gamecocks. I think as we're doing this in about mid-June, last over-under total I saw for Carolina wins, I think, was maybe around 5.5. So that tells you a pretty competitive schedule with a lot of things that could go either way for the Gamecocks. And what will be, I'm not going to say it's a make or break year for Shane Beamer, but certainly one that will matter.
It will matter a lot. 5 wins last year, kind of took a step back. I think it's important to get some key wins this year. But I say that when we're about to look at a schedule it's tough. I mean, it's got to be up there towards the top of the toughest schedules in the conference, and several ranked teams, several teams that we could anticipate being in the college football playoff on the schedule. One good thing though, there's no Georgia, there's no Texas, but still you look up and down the schedule and it's pretty tough for Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks. And so I think you look at it, I think that where they have it set at is maybe they could get one above that. We'll see, but it's a tough schedule, Chris. There's no doubt about it. South Carolina is playing, of course, in the toughest league, but they have a pretty tough schedule as well.
Let's get right into it. I'll bring that up onto the screen here, and we will look. You guys can look at this along with us as we're doing it. And here we go. Starting week 1 with Old Dominion. I'm not sure if these teams have any kind of a recent football history here, but we're going through the preseason magazine phase of the summer, and I've got my Athlon in front of me. And Old Dominion rated number 102 out of 134 teams. So not a lot of built-in wins on this schedule, but that probably falls in the category of the 3 or 4 games most likely to be easier wins for the Gamecocks.
I certainly think so, and I think it's good to start off a schedule like they have with a game like this. Hey, let's get a win. Let's start the season out with a win because, as we see, guess what? Week 2, you start conference play. So I think this Old Dominion game is big for the Gamecocks to go out. Hey, let's start on a good note. Let's get a win with the tough schedule coming.
Kentucky, that's been an interesting series in recent years. This is a game that we circled, I think, is maybe a make or break game for Carolina's season.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because it's week 2. I mean, you're still learning about your team at this point, and hey, you got to go play a conference game. And it's not just any conference game. I think this is a big game for South Carolina because of the teams they have coming up. You want to be able to get a win over Kentucky. South Carolina won this game last year. It was the last conference game of the season last year, late November matchup, and it was a 17-14 win for the Gamecocks a year ago. And so you, with it being week 2, I mean, this is, you need to get a win, again, based off the rest of the SEC slate. But again, I mean, this is a team that you can beat, you have beaten. So I'm looking for this to be a fun game right off the bat. I mean, this will be the first SEC game that we will see in 2024, and I certainly think it will be a really good game based off where I think both of these teams are and based off the fact that it's week 2 and we're still learning about these teams at this point of the season. But yes, huge game week 2 for South Carolina.
Yeah, South Carolina won that game the last 2 years. Kentucky won that one the 2 years before that. And both teams breaking in new quarterbacks here. Lenore Sellers, presumably the starter for South Carolina, although I think that to be determined. And, of course, Kentucky with the transfer quarterback in its own right from Georgia who'll get to start there. LSU breaking in Garrett Nussmeier. I say breaking in. He's played a decent role as a backup there before and has been in that program a while. But another matchup of new quarterbacks in terms of who was the starter a year ago compared to who's the starter for 2024 when these teams meet in week 3.
Yeah, I think again, you talk about having Kentucky week 2, having LSU week 3 is man, that's tough. I mean, 2 of your first 3 games are SEC games. One being against LSU, who again a lot of people are high on this year, even with Garrett Nussmeier stepping in at quarterback. I think it's going to be a really good offense. Now we'll see about the defense and how they've progressed through the offseason with all the changes. But this is going to be a good LSU team. There's no doubt about it. I think it's big that South Carolina has this one at home in Columbia. So, hey, again, you're going to learn a lot about your team against Kentucky. You'll even learn more about South Carolina here against LSU. But I think it's big for South Carolina to have this game against the Tigers in South Carolina.
And then in week 4, probably the biggest breather of the season, Athlon has Akron number 130 of 134. And boy, they're going to need a breather for what's ahead.
Yeah, this game and then the open week the following week could not come at a better time. So you've had Kentucky and LSU, and so now you play Akron. You're going to work on some things you're trying to improve on based on the first 2 games, and then you've got an open week. And take a deep breath because the most important stretch I think of the season is coming up to start October. So yeah, the Akron game I think comes at a nice time to, hey, let's take a deep breath. We've learned a lot from Kentucky. We've learned a lot from LSU. Let's work on that. And then the open week is huge to, hey, let's get some composure. Let's keep working on those things. Let's be sound because this is tough. This is brutal coming up the next few weeks as we look at the schedule for South Carolina.
Yeah, Ole Miss will mark the 4th of 5 games at home to this point in the season, and this would be a monumental win for Shane Beamer if he could get it. Carolina's big wins usually come later in the season, but this feels like we've done make or break games, but this could be really a game that would make Carolina's season if it could sneak a win over Ole Miss in this spot.
Oh, it'd be huge. This you look back to last year for South Carolina. It was the middle of the season with Tennessee, Florida, Missouri, and A&M, and South Carolina dropped all 4 of those games right there in the middle of the season. And I think that's really what turned the season down to a losing season, no bowl game. Is because you lost those 4 games right in a row, right in the middle of the season. And this year again, this is a tough stretch right in the middle of the season for South Carolina. So you got Ole Miss to kind of start off this tough stretch. You're coming off a bye week. This is a game where you take a deep breath. You've got this one at home, and you go play football. You mentioned they play. They've got some big wins in the month of November, but this would be huge to get a big October win. I mean, you're talking Ole Miss as a team a lot of folks have in the playoff, maybe have as a contender for the national championship. So this would be huge if they were able to win this one. This will just be Ole Miss' second conference game of the year. Their first 4 games are non-conference games, and they will have Kentucky the week before this game. So they'll just be fresh into SEC play. And South Carolina, till this point, will have already seen Kentucky and LSU. So, I think this could be big for South Carolina to be able to win this game. But again, this is a first of a tough stretch for the Gamecocks.
Yeah, and then Alabama. That's not a team that the Gamecocks play a whole lot. Went back and looked. Excuse me. It's at Alabama. That is right. They have not played since 2019. I was a little distracted by my research here. Wanted to make sure that was right. But yeah, and I think of Stephen Garcia every time I think of Alabama and South Carolina. That may be the most famous win of Steve Spurrier's career. Yeah. But this will be a matchup of 2 teams that haven't played this decade, and that one on the road.
Yeah, I mean, and you're coming off playing Ole Miss, who we said is a contender for the college football playoff. Then you go to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, also most likely a contender for the college football playoff. So this time on the road, like I mentioned, I think it helps when you have Ole Miss at home in Columbia, but you go to Tuscaloosa for this one. This will be the 3rd SEC game for Alabama. They play Georgia, then Vanderbilt, and then this game with South Carolina. But like we mentioned, I mean, South Carolina is going to have played Kentucky, LSU, and Ole Miss by now, so they've seen some really good teams, some really good talent. But again, this is going to be super tough for South Carolina going to Tuscaloosa. And you're right, it's a matchup we have not seen a lot of over the years just because they've been in different divisions. But we have seen some good Alabama-South Carolina matchups. And this one, I think, could possibly be interesting. But with it being in Tuscaloosa, I'm sure Alabama will be a big favorite.
On the topic of seldom seen matchups, we go to never seen matchups. Oklahoma and South Carolina have never played in their football histories. And so this will be the third of 3 straight brutal games, and that one will be in Norman.
Yeah, I think out of the 3, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Oklahoma, I think this one will be the one that South Carolina is eyeing the most. They've never played, like you mentioned. Oklahoma will be coming off of a tough stretch as well. They'll have Tennessee, Auburn, and Texas, and that Texas game will be the week before this matchup. So I think South Carolina may be looking at this one and say, hey, this is one of these 3 that we may be catching them at a good time, coming off of Texas, coming off a tough stretch as well. And so I think South Carolina is going to be really eyeing this one to get a win on the road there in Norman. And I think that would be a huge win for Shane Beamer to be able to go to Norman. High expectations on Oklahoma. There's no doubt about it this year. And so I think that would be huge for South Carolina to be able to pull off a win at Oklahoma. But it'll be tough. I mean, Oklahoma is going to have a great offense this year. They've put some pieces in. They've got some guys out of the portal to go along with Jackson Arnold at quarterback. Their defense, I think, will be kind of at a Brent Venables defense level this year. I really do. It hasn't been the last couple of years. But I think it's going to be a solid Oklahoma team. But South Carolina has a chance to do something special, I think, and catch somewhat of a good time, I think, on October the 19th there.
And then comes another bye week. That's the second of 2 bye weeks. I actually like the structure of their bye weeks as it fits into this schedule because you got Texas A&M coming to Columbia. Last year, A&M won that game 30-17. The year before, the Gamecocks won it. Don't really know what to make of Mike Elko and A&M as we do this just yet, but we'll have a lot more of an indication by the time these 2 teams play.
Oh yeah, for sure. And you mentioned the structure of their off weeks. I think were huge. This is a much needed bye week. I mean, we talked about you take a deep breath to get ready for that tough stretch in their last open week. Again, in this week, you're taking a deep breath. Let's finish strong. Let's finish this thing out. And yeah, A&M is going to be a tough one. I think it's going to be a much improved A&M team. They will be coming off a game with LSU. So maybe South Carolina catching them at a good time. I mean, you mentioned last year A&M won that one 30-17. Gamecocks will be looking for some revenge in that one. It's been an interesting series when these 2 teams have met, and so I think this could be a really fun game. I think this is could be a winnable game, having this one at home for South Carolina, and so I'm interested to see this one because there's a lot to learn about both teams. I think, especially with Texas A&M being under a new coaching staff. And so by this point, we'll know a lot about these teams, but I anticipate this one to be a really good matchup and maybe one South Carolina can take coming off a bye week and kind of propel themselves into the final stretch here of their schedule.
Yeah, there's not a lot of constants in SEC football now between the old and the changes with adding Texas and Oklahoma. But one constant in both is the presence of Vanderbilt on the schedule as these 2 teams rolled Eastern Division rivals. They'll play again. Carolina won this one 47-6 last year. I think the previous 2 were a little closer, but Carolina's just dominated this series in terms of wins and losses. I think it has won every single game in what has been an annual series, I believe, from 2009 on in terms of Carolina's winning.
Yeah, I think they'll continue that this year. They're a good team in the month of November, typically under Shane Beamer, so they're looking to have a good November and get a win over Vanderbilt this year. But I think this game comes at a good time too, coming off Texas A&M and right before Missouri. And so, yeah, I'm looking for South Carolina to get another win over Vanderbilt this year.
And then comes Missouri, which has just owned this series. It's weird. Carolina has these things where it just seems to dominate certain teams and other teams not so well. I think Missouri's got a 4 or 5 game winning streak in this one, and those teams will meet in Columbia, South Carolina there in November.
Yeah, this will be the last conference game of the season. It's a tough one. Again, we talked about Ole Miss and Alabama being teams that most people have in the college football playoff. A lot of folks have Missouri in the playoff as well this year. So high expectations on the Tigers. It's hard to know, really, with it being a late November game, what both teams will look like at this point. But if Shane Beamer can put together in November like he did in 2022, i.e., they beat Tennessee in November of 22, who was coming off some big wins, and including a win over Alabama that year. This could be a game, maybe South Carolina. They've got it at home in Columbia, South Carolina. Again, Missouri is going to be making a final push at this point of the year to the college football playoff, the 12-team playoff. So it would be huge if South Carolina could get this one again in the final conference game and kind of play spoiler to a team who's looking to get into the college football playoff.
And then comes the lone FCS game against Wofford next to last week of the season. And again, not a lot of easy wins here. And Wofford, I think, has run some gimmicky offenses before. You may remember that better than I do. But that'll be the matchup leading into the big game against Clemson.
Yeah, and I think based on this schedule and what we've looked at, I mean, you've got Old Dominion, Akron, and now Wofford. I think these games you need a win. You need to do whatever it takes to win. You need some automatics on this schedule because it is tough. And so I think South Carolina needs to look at this one ready to play. But hey, you need to get this win. You find whatever it takes to get this win to get ready for Clemson.
Yeah, Wofford used to run a triple offense. I think doing a little research here is going maybe more towards a spread-oriented approach. Don't know where that will factor into things, but the last thing you want as a team in Carolina's position is to run in kind of a gimmick you've got to prepare for. So we'll keep an eye on that one just in case there's something strange there. And then the Clemson matchup. Clemson won this one last year, 16-7. The year before, Carolina went into Clemson and snapped, what was it, like a 40-something game home winning streak for Clemson. So, yeah, there was that, and be interested to see what the rematch looks like.
Yeah, and Clemson they've been decent. They've been getting the wins they need to, but this is not the same Clemson team that we saw 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago and on. Dabo Swinney has not quite changed with the rest of college football, and so therefore they have not been at the top of college football like they were at one point. And so I think this would be huge for South Carolina to go back to Clemson to get a win like they did last time. Again, they put together a great November in 2022, including a win over Tennessee and Clemson, and so hopefully they can cap off their season with a win again this year. Tough schedule, like I said, and it ends with the tough team as always in a rivalry game. Really, anything can happen, but would love to see South Carolina able to go on the road and get a win to cap off their season there in November.
Yeah, I think Carolina is going to probably be an underdog as often as not based on that 5.5 over-under. But, I mean, a lot of games here, especially with the way the Gamecocks play late in the year, I have a feeling that I could go pick every game of this schedule and be wrong about at least 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah, and that's just how it goes, really, for South Carolina. And they're really looking for some consistency this year, and I think that's what they've lacked the last few years is just consistency, and putting together a good season all year, not just in November, not just at the beginning of the season. So, last year they were at the point where they had to win, 4 straight games in order to get a bowl game, and then they dropped that game to Clemson. They beat Jacksonville State, they beat Vanderbilt, and they beat Kentucky, and then lost to Clemson last year. Did not get a bowl game, and so they've been in positions where we got to win these games to get a bowl game, and they need to be at the point where they can kind of take a deep breath in November. And I think that's what I'm looking for South Carolina most this year with the schedule. Can they find some consistency? It's very tough. There's no doubt about it. Looking at this schedule, it's brutal. It's tough, but I think if they can win some of these games throughout the year and not have to put themselves with their back against the wall late in the season, we got to win this many games to get a bowl game. I think that'll be big for South Carolina, just that they're able to take a deep breath throughout the year.
Yeah, can't wait to see how this goes for Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks. Be an interesting season. Teams are always competitive, always give you a ball game, and again, lot of swing games. I feel like on this schedule. Well, we'll be here to cover it through the season. Best way to follow us, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. For Chase Robinson, I'm Chris Lee. We are Southeastern 14, presented by Bet Online.